Welcome to our video lesson on histograms. Please open your notebook to your learning goal page. Right now we're talking about learning goal number 8. It's to create and analyze histograms. Please, once you've gotten there, highlight, underline, or circle the word histograms, and then think about your level of understanding. Do you know what the word histogram means? Do you have a guess of what it might be? And then circle your before level of understanding based on those thoughts. When you're finished, please glue your handout in to the next page in your notebook and then click play because we're going to get started. Alright, let's start by talking about what histograms are. The underlined words are the words here that you need to fill in on your note. Histograms are graphs that use bars to display numerical data, that just means numbers, numerical data that have been organized into equal intervals. This intervals word is really important for histograms. If you look down here at our histogram, this is what it means by intervals. Each of these bars represents a certain age range, not just one age, but people ages 1 to 10. If it wasn't an interval, it would just be 1-year-olds. But the fact that histograms talk about intervals make them special. So an interval, oh, this is cut off a little bit. An interval is all the numbers between two numbers. Please make sure you have that written down. So this histogram here came from this frequency table. It was really easy to make this histogram because our data was already divided into equal intervals. Some key points about histograms are that, first of all, each bar is the same width. So if you look in here, each bar is the same width. The bars are all touching. It's not like in a bar graph where there's space between the bars. In this situation, all the bars are touching. The last one, and the most important one, is that each interval is the same size. If you look back up here at our frequency table, you can see that the number of ages in each of these intervals is the same. Something you have to be very careful about is when you have an interval that starts with 0. If we had the ages 0 to 10 here, this interval would actually be bigger than all the other intervals. We would have to have 0 to 9 as our interval. So please be careful if you're working with a data set that uses 0, because it makes your data set one set bigger. Alright, we're going to talk about understanding a histogram. We're going to look at this histogram here. Okay, so it tells us about threatened species of mammals in Europe. The first question is, what size are the intervals? So look down here where it says our intervals. What size are they? I'm going to give you a few seconds to write down your guess. Alright, hopefully you guessed that the size of each interval is 5. Each one of these intervals is 5 because it includes 5 different sets of numbers. So let's look at the first one. This interval right here includes 0 threatened species, so if there's none, 1 threatened species, 2 threatened species, 3 threatened species, 4 threatened species. It's like a tongue twister. If you count how many there are 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the size of each one of these intervals is 5. This is what I'm talking about with the 0. You have to be careful if your interval starts with 0 like this one does, because it makes it look like it has only an interval size of 4, but it's actually an interval size of 5. So please be very careful with that. The next question, question number 2. How many countries have 9 or fewer threatened species? I'm going to give you a second to think about that. If you'd like some more time to come up with your guess, please pause the recording, and then when you have your guess, click play again. Alright, to figure this one out, we have to look and see where the 9 is on our histogram. Alright, so the two sections that we're going to look closely at are this one and this one, because those are the two that would have the countries with fewer than 9. Then we need to figure out the size of each bar. So let's start with the first one. this bar right here is between the 6 and the 7. And the number that would be, between the 6 and the 8. And the number that would be between the 6 and the 8 is a 7. So that means that there are 7 countries in Europe that have between 0 and 4 threatened species. Alright, let's look at the next one. We have to look between 5 and 9. How many countries have between 5 and 9 threatened species? This one is 19. So we need to add 19 plus 7, and our answer is 26. So 26 countries have 9 or fewer threatened species. Alright, the next one. Can you tell from the histogram whether any of the countries have 0 threatened species? Explain. I'm going to give you a few seconds. If you'd like more time, feel free to pause the video. The answer is no. We can't tell from the histogram if any countries have 0 because our first interval is 0 to 4. And if a country has 1 threatened species, it would be in there. If it has 2, it would be in there. So no, we can't see if a country has 0. I say no because the interval is from 0 to 4. Alright, hopefully this has helped you see how we can use histograms and understand them a little bit better. We're going to move on to the next step. The next step is to make a histogram. We are going to go through with 5 steps to making histograms. You need to fill them in on your guided note, please. Step 1 is to organize your data into equal intervals. If they're not already in equal intervals, you need to organize them. This might be a really hard part. But make sure, just watch out for that 0. Make sure that each interval is the same size. Okay, step 2. Draw and label a horizontal and vertical axes. So those are our x, our y, and our x axes. Determine your intervals and write them on the x and y axes. Remember, your intervals must be of the same size. They must be the same size. Step 4. For each interval, draw a bar whose height is given by the frequency. And step 5, title your histogram. If you need some more time to write the steps down, please pause the video here. Alright, we are now going to make a histogram. Our first step, of this data right here, shots per hockey game. It's a nice Canadian reference for us. Our first step in making a histogram is organize our data into equal intervals. We're lucky in this situation because our data has already been organized for us. Here it's organized into 5 equal intervals, so we can check that first step off right away. We don't need to worry about it. Step 2. Draw and label a horizontal and vertical axes. In order to do that, you need to look at your graph paper. See how much space you have for your whole graph. So what I like to do is start getting a ruler and drawing a straight line along the horizontal to be the x-axis and the vertical to be the y-axis. And here is what I did. So I've got my x-axis drawn and now my y-axis drawn. It is also important that you label, I don't think it says in our steps, but you need to make sure you label your x and y axes. You get your labels from your frequency table, so here and here. Make sure you have that written down. My chart, just so you know, is 20 units along the x-axis and 20 units along the y-axis. So if you want to make it the same size as mine, you want 20 units both ways. Feel free to pause the video now if you need more time. Our next step is to determine our intervals and write them on the x and y axes. Okay, this can be hard. What I did was I looked and saw that we have 5 intervals over here. And I knew that this length here was 20 units. So I had to think of a way to divide 20 by 5. And I realized that each of my intervals could be 4 units wide. And that would give me a nice even spread and bars of the same size. The next thing I had to do was look up the side for my frequency. I looked over here and saw that the maximum frequency I have is 8 and the minimum is 1. So I thought I would start at 0 and go up by 2 so that our graph fills our whole page. If you need more time here, please pause it. I'm going to move on. Our fourth step is for each interval, draw a bar whose height is given by the frequency. Okay, so I just went through in order. 1 to 7 is our first interval. 1 to 7 is right here. And I saw that for 1 to 7 there was a frequency of 5. So I drew my line up here by 5. And then I used a ruler to connect it down to the side. Next one. Number of shots for 8 to 14 was 1. So I drew my line across here. Then I looked at the next one. 15 to 21 had a frequency of 8. So I drew my line way up here and then connected it down the sides. Please make sure you use a ruler so they don't end up squiggly like that. The next one, for an interval of 22 to 28, had a frequency of 2. And 29 to 35 had a frequency of 4. The last thing is to put a title on your histogram. This is really, really important. You will lose points without your title, so please make sure you put a title on there. And those are the steps to making a histogram. Can you please go back to your learning goal sheet right now and circle your after level of understanding for creating and analyzing histograms. Once you've done that, you're going to do the practice. This one is on your handout that you've been filling in throughout the video. You need to make a histogram of this data in your notebook. Then you need to do the IXL practice. The QR code is on your handout, and if you want to, you only need to go to a score of 70. Do not go past 70 because they get harder and we haven't covered that material yet. Make sure you log in because I will be checking it. The link is on Moodle if your QR code reader is not working, and your username should be your first name, last initial 92, and your password is math. If you don't know your username and password, you need to check the pink booklet that is at the front of the room. That's all for now. See you later.